The Murder of Katie Fusco, True Crime Documentary 2025. Tap like, keep your eyes on the timeline and tell me the exact second your stomach drops, because this story looks like a reunion until you notice what's missing in the frame. A quiet Carolina street, a normal two-story home, and a family name that won't mean anything to you until it does. Years earlier, in New York, a boy grew into a man who seemed to collect isolation the way other people collected friends.
His name was Stephen.
He learned early how to make attention feel like gravity, pulling people close and then holding them there. In his 20s, he found Alyssa, a teenager with more hope than armor, and their lives fused in a rush that left no room for breath. Control moved in first. Fear followed with a key. A child arrived, a girl who deserved gentleness and got noise instead. Alyssa watched the temperature in the house swing from calm to dangerous, with no warning. She saw what anger did to small things that couldn't defend themselves. She learned to count the seconds between an outburst and a silence that felt worse. When the baby was 8 months old, Alyssa did the bravest, most excruciating thing a mother can do. She chose safety over possession. She signed papers with shaking hands and handed her daughter to another set of arms, praying that love would find her there. The new family gave the child a new name, Katie, and a new life. Dover, New York. The Fuscos were not remarkable on paper, which is what made their love extraordinary in practice. Anthony kept schedules and promises. Kelly kept calendars and warmth. They raised Katie on ordinary goodness. Homework at the table, rides to practice, a bedroom wall that changed with each new interest. She loved animals so much she refused to eat them.
She drew.
She wrote. She smiled with her whole face. The kind of kid who remembers everyone else's birthday. But blood has a voice. At 18, Katie felt a calling. Not because she was unloved, but because identity is a puzzle that begs for the corner pieces. She searched. A message. A reply. A meeting arranged with her biological mother in Knightdale, North Carolina. Alyssa arrived with the look of someone who had survived a storm and never put the raincoat away. They talked for hours. The relief was real. The girl Alyssa had protected by letting go was alive, whole, and brilliant. It should have ended there, with coffee and tears and the safety of distance. Curiosity, however, widened the door. Katie met her biological father. The conversation was easy, disarming in the way a practiced host makes strangers feel like regulars. The visit turned into visits, the visits into a decision. 18 and legally free to choose, Katie chose to spend time with the people who started her life. She told the Fuscos she wanted to move for a while, to see what a bigger family felt like. They warned. They worried. They loved her enough to let her try. In the Pladl house, something shifted the second Katie crossed the threshold. Alyssa and Stephen were already splitting in spirit, separate rooms, separate air. But Stephen's attention traveled like a spotlight and never moved. His clothes got younger.
His hair changed.
He laughed too loud at conversations not meant for him. He waited for Katie in doorways and hallways, a shadow that kept reappearing. Then he carried a blanket to her floor and began sleeping there. Alyssa saw it, named it, and left. Even after she moved out, she kept checking on her daughters, walking a tightrope between warning and not wanting to drive Katie further into harm by pushing too hard. One afternoon, a small notebook shattered whatever hope remained. In a diary kept by one of the younger girls, Alyssa read a sentence that felt like a trapdoor. Stephen and Katie were dating. She called him the way a person calls a fire department that's 2 houses too far. He answered with a voice as calm as a countertop. "We're in love." He said it as if language could sanitize what reality could not.
Police were contacted.
Lines were drawn. But lines mean little to people who have learned how to step over them while smiling. Stephen and Katie moved again, this time under the roof of Stephen's mother. The family tree bent until it snapped. What followed should have been impossible. A marriage license in another state, paperwork that lied, a quiet ceremony. Photographs appeared online. A dress, a suit, a curve of a stomach that meant a baby was coming. Comments filled with congratulations from people who didn't know or refused to understand what they were seeing. By fall, a child was born. Bennett. He was beautiful and blameless, the kind of baby who resets a room just by breathing. The law finally caught up. In early 2018, Stephen and Katie were arrested, charged, separated by a court's order that should have been the country's first sentence. Enough. Bennett went to Stephen's mother. Katie went back to her adoptive parents, the only home that had ever taught her what love looks like without strings. Distance gives clarity. The fog lifted. Katie asked for a divorce. She closed a door she had never been safe behind. On paper, it was a decision about paperwork. In life, it was a declaration that a spell had broken and a young woman wanted herself back. She told Stephen. On the other end of the call, the silence wasn't silence. It was a plan forming with teeth. Days later, on a quiet stretch of road that looks like every drive you've ever made to help a grandparent, a minivan idled at a stop sign, and a second vehicle pulled along its side. But that is tomorrow's chapter. Tonight, we end where the dread begins. A father who refused to be told no, a daughter who finally said it, and a line on a map between two states that is about to become a fault line. If you've been listening closely, you can hear the hinge creaking. Morning in Dover carried the ordinary sounds of safety, coffee pouring, tires whispering on damp roads, a father jingling his keys by the door. After months of confusion and headlines, Katie had finally stepped back into a life that ran on kindness and routine. She slept without checking the hallway. She laughed in full sentences again. When she talked about tomorrow, it didn't sound like a dare. It sounded like a plan. Paperwork moved in slow government steps. Charges filed, bond posted, a no-contact order like a thin wall built overnight. She told the court what she wanted, then told her family what she needed, and finally told Stephen what he could not change. Divorce. The word fit in her mouth like a small, hard stone. She didn't spit it out. She placed it where it belonged and left it there. On the other end of the phone, the pause was longer than language. The silence he gave back wasn't surrender. It was a recalibration, the kind of person does when they realize the story they wrote for you is being edited without permission. He promised nothing and implied everything. When he hung up, the room he stood in felt smaller, but his certainty swelled to fill it. Katie filled her days with good noise, errands with her adoptive mom, calls from friends, a checklist for school, and work that made sense again. Anthony watched the house like a former officer does, out of habit, not fear. He noticed mail that arrived on time, neighbors who waved. He kept an eye on the corners of the street where strangers used driveways to turn around. He had spent a career reading tension in other men. He recognized the way air changes before a storm. In Nightdale, the version of Stephen that had smiled into cameras was gone. He moved on autopilot, eating because the clock said so, sleeping when the body insisted, but his attention pulsed in one direction. He drove aimlessly, and then not aimlessly at all. He rehearsed travel times in his head. He memorized maps the way people memorize songs. He told himself he was planning a conversation, the final one where everyone would finally understand him. He curated his rage into something that sounded like resolve. From time to time, he parked near places that didn't belong to him and watched people who didn't know they were on stage. You could have driven past and never noticed the man in the idling van, face half in shadow, hands steady on the wheel, gaze fixed on a door that wasn't his. He practiced timing at intersections and learned how long a red light held. He measured the distance between lanes and the width of a shoulder. He bought what he told himself a man buys when he is not being heard. The order forbidding contact was just ink until someone defied it. He edged around its edges. Calls that rang but didn't connect, messages typed and erased, a trail of unsent explanations that only convinced him further of his own narrative. He was certain that everyone else had cast him as the villain in a play he thought was about love. When certainty and grievance shake hands, restraint goes quiet. In Dover, the calendar said April and the day said errands. Katie asked Anthony to ride with her to Waterbury to help her grandmother tidy the house. It was the kind of small favor family swaps without thinking, an afternoon that ends with pizza boxes folded into recycling and a wave from a porch. They buckled in. Anthony checked his mirrors like the season habit it was. The route was as familiar as any a lifetime local can drive without looking. Route 7. Then the slow draw toward 55, where trees fold the road into a tunnel and you can hear your own tires. Somewhere far enough back to be invisible, a minivan merged. It kept a polite distance the way patience does when it's pretending. On a traffic camera, the three vehicles would look unremarkable. A sedan with two people, an empty patch of road, a second vehicle matching speed, the whole scene washed in the pale light of a bleached spring afternoon. If you stood on a hill and watched, you might have noticed how the second car mirrored the first through lane changes like a shadow that had learned asphalt. In the weeks since the court date, Katie had started speaking about the future in specifics again. She wanted to take her portfolio and make it stronger. She wanted to find a job where ideas and images lived, where the skills she practiced in high school had a place to earn their keep. She held her phone the way people do when it's become a tool again, not a tether. When she looked over, Anthony was tapping the steering wheel in rhythm with an old song on the radio. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and for a long stretch of road, that was the only story that needed telling. Stephen crossed state lines as if they were suggestions. He had driven through the night before with the kind of focus that makes miles disappear. He knew the neighborhood, the way morning rush hour pours into late morning quiet, the corner store with the stuttered neon, the stop sign that collects leaves in October. He let the van drift behind them when there were witnesses and crept closer when there weren't. He didn't need a map anymore. Obsession is its own GPS. It recalculates until it finds a path. At the kitchen table in Waterbury, Katie's grandmother set aside a stack of folded towels and checked the window, counting the minutes since the call that said they were on the way. In Dover, Kelly wiped a clean counter twice and pretended she had forgotten something upstairs so she could stand for a moment and breathe next to Katie's empty room. Small rituals, because mothers know when quiet is not comfort but prelude. Halfway to the turn, the sky leaned over the valley and pressed everything into a single color, the blue of cold steel. Anthony's instincts flickered. He checked the mirror again, saw the minivan where he had seen it before, and felt the prickle in the back of his neck that says something in the pattern isn't random. He didn't mention it. He reached for the habit that had carried him through tight places. Observe. Don't announce. Keep moving, keep thinking. Up ahead, the intersection formed like a slow-opening hand. A line of mailboxes, a sagging fence, a sign that makes locals laugh because it's always been slightly crooked. Anthony eased his foot, and the car softened into the stop, the way experienced drivers do when they want passengers not to spill their thoughts. The van behind them adjusted without drama, rolling forward, calm as a held breath. In Nightdale, Alyssa sat on the edge of a bed and stared at a phone that refused to ring. She had learned not to pray for certainty. She prayed for delay, 5 minutes, 10. That would let someone change their mind. The clock did what clocks do. It moved. On Route 7, the light on the dash threw a gentle glow on Katie's hands. She tilted her head at a thought she wanted to remember later, something about a design she'd seen that would make a perfect header. Anthony glanced left, then right. He caught a break in the traffic that felt like permission. He lifted his foot, preparing to roll forward into the afternoon that waited. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement where movement shouldn't be. The minivan drawing level instead of lining up behind. The lane closing instead of opening. The pattern breaking in a way his training recognized instantly and could not correct in time. He inhaled like a diver about to go under. We will not follow the sound. We will stop on the breath before it. The thin slice of stillness where a decision becomes an event. The van is beside them now, the world narrowing to the width of an intersection and the length of a heartbeat. And then the scene moves, and nothing will ever be ordinary again. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean quiet. It means a sound too large to fit in the room. When it recedes, the world rushes in wrong. Sirens redraw the road in blue and white. Radios speak in clipped syllables. Neighbors step onto porches with hands folded to their mouths. On Route 7, a sedan rests at an angle strangers will remember for years, the way a memory rests at an angle inside a life. Officers move with that careful urgency you only see when training meets dread. They do not narrate. They secure, they shield, they call, they mark. They preserve the dignity of the people they could not protect. Word travels faster than vehicles. In Waterbury, a phone rings in a kitchen where folded towels still wait. In Dover, Kelly's hands find the counter again and hold it like a rail on a ship. In Nightdale, Alyssa sits very straight, as if posture could keep the world from listing. She listens to a voice trying to be kind and precise at the same time, and somewhere in the middle of the sentence, she understands that future and past have changed places. The investigation turns itself on like a machine that's been kept oiled. Cameras, canvases, traffic poles, battered witnesses of chance who are waiting at the same light and saw the same van slide where it didn't belong. A plate number here, a partial there. A fingerprint the road can't keep, but the world around it can. Within the hour, a call comes from another house, another woman. Stephen's mother, voice gone thin with terror, reporting words no parent should ever have to repeat. What her son told her, what he had done, where he might be going next. The line doesn't drop. It frays. 18 miles away, a second scene. A van at rest by an empty lot. Engines of spring peepers loud in the ditches. The sky the yellow of a day that can't decide whether to end. Deputies approach with the measured caution that keeps people alive. Inside, a single figure, still, and the same weapon that rewrote an intersection's history. Death has ended its own pursuit. There will be no arrest, no trial, no cross-examination. Peeling away lies one question at a time. The state will proceed without the one person who could have answered why and refused to. News breaks in the grammar of emergency. Names, places, times. Then the pauses where anchors don't know what to say and choose solemnity over speculation. A community absorbs the wrongness in layers, first as shock, then as a need to understand the math of the day. The math doesn't help. 3 lives braided by paperwork, by DNA, by the stubborn hope of love, now separated by dates etched into stone. In the weeks that follow, the system does what it can with what remains. Reports thicken into binders. A timeline grows crowded with stamps no one will forget. A marriage license that never should have been signed. A birth certificate with a name too new to carry such weight. A court order that drew a bright line and couldn't make it bright enough. Somewhere on a desk, a small evidence bag holds a set of keys that feel warm in memory and cold in the hand. Grief arranges itself in public rituals and private bargains. In New York, a church fills with faces that have run out of useful words. Photographs and flowers try to do language's work. Anthony's colleagues from the correctional institution stand in rows that look like strength because they have to. Kelly rests her palm on the smooth back of a pew and breathes like a swimmer. Alyssa arrives wearing the kind of composure that can only be borrowed from faith or shock. She speaks when it is her turn, voice steady, telling the world what her daughter was: bright, kind, creative, stubborn in the best possible way. What she is careful not to do is let the ending redefine the person. She speaks to a love that predated the horror and outlives it. Reporters step back when they should. Most do. A few don't. People learn the etiquette of sorrow on the fly. What to share, what to keep, when to close a door, when to open one for a neighbor carrying a casserole, and apologies for how bad casseroles are at this kind of thing. Online, strangers argue over words like consent and blame, as if picking sides could rewind a calendar. The families turn off the noise and try to sleep. If there is a lesson, it lives in the smallest units, because grand lessons collapse under weight like this. A judge's order is not a force field. A paper boundary still asks the world to behave. Systems can announce rules. They cannot guarantee hearts will hear them. When danger wears the language of love, even smart people can miss the fuse until it burns their fingers. And sometimes the warning signs are as bright as daylight and still, somehow, not enough. The house in Nightdale remains what it always was: siding, steps, a doorbell that rings when pressed. It is the history inside that won't fit anymore. In Dover, the kitchen counter goes back to being a counter, though Kelly's hand will always find the same spot. The intersection learns traffic again. Lines are repainted. Locals drive through and feel a hitch in their chests they cannot explain to out-of-towners. Somewhere a detective closes a file with the knowledge that closure is a word invented by people who needed a noun for ending and ended up with a metaphor instead. Walk to the edge of the map where 3 routes cross: love, obsession, and the law's thin thread, and you will find a quiet place with no good answers. The wind lays the grass down and stands it back up. A flyer on a bulletin board yellows is replaced yellows again. The story does not tidy itself into a moral. It sits down beside you and waits for you to admit what you already know. Monsters do not always knock. Sometimes they use a key. And still, even in that admission, there is something sturdier than despair. It lives in the people who go on. The mothers who set an extra place when memory asks, the fathers who check mirrors and keep driving, the families who refuse to let a last day define a life. Their love, unremarkable in the way only the strongest things are, is what remains when the sirens move on. It is the only sound that fills a room correctly.